Our second witness is someone who many of us in California know very well and whose insights we have been relying on for a long time. Mr. Stephen Greenhut is Resident Senior Fellow and Western Region Director for State Affairs at R Street Institute. He was a columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune who focused on California policy and state government. He authored the book, Winning the Water Wars: California Can Meet Its Water Needs by Promoting Abundance Rather Than Managing Scarcity. His testimony will identify many areas in which policy promises in California that were made with no follow-through from California leaders. As a California resident, he can speak to the personal impact many of these policy decisions have had on him and his family.
Chairman Fitzgerald, Ranking Member Nadler, and members of the subcommittee. My name's Stephen Greenhut. I'm Western Region Director for the R Street Institute, a free market think tank, and have written extensively about California issues for newspapers and books for the past 27 years. I love the state and want to see it prosper. One of the common themes in my writing has been the state's commitment to expanding bureaucracy and regulation without much regard for whether the new programs accomplish their stated goals. But the Los Angeles wildfires have exposed festering regulatory hurdles that have exacerbated the crisis. Many are years in the making, maddeningly complex and not given to quick solutions. It's a confluence of bad policy involving brush clearance, water, insurance, firefighting, housing, and climate change. California has created a tangled web of regulation that renders this once innovative state incapable of accomplishing anything efficiently, even environmental protection. Consider California's extensive climate change agenda. Instead of building a resilient system that handles whatever Mother Nature throws our way, our state constantly uses it as an excuse for inaction on nuts and bolts issues. By the way, uncontrolled wildfires undermine whatever progress we're making in reducing carbon dioxide emissions. University of Chicago research found that the 2020 wildfires emitted close to double the state's emissions reductions achieved over 16 years. The governor has agreed that we need to step up brush clearance, but very little happens. The California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and other laws require environmental impact reports for clearance projects and 2 to 3 approvals for controlled burns. They can take years. The state could, for instance, consider using more funds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to pay for this, rather than prioritizing a high-speed rail system that's unlikely to do much about the climate. It's always an issue of priorities. The wildfires have also highlighted California's counterproductive insurance regulations. I've been writing for years about the coming insurance catastrophe. It can take many months, close to a year, for insurers to wade through the process of hearings, rate reviews, and opposition to such hikes by consumer attorney interveners who earn large fees for their efforts. The problem goes back to Proposition 103, the 1988 ballot initiative that instituted the prior approval system for rate increases and rolled back rates. It created a price control system. Unable to easily adjust rates to reflect risk, insurers quietly, and then not so quietly, began exiting. The insurance commissioner crafted a suite of useful reforms that were showing some promise, but why did it take so long? With this catastrophic wildfire, it remains to be seen whether these changes will be enough to stop the continued exodus of insurers. Many homeowners in the LA area didn't have coverage or were relying on the state-created insurer of last resort, the FAIR Plan, and there's much talk of that bare-bones system facing possible insolvency. Rather than addressing the insurance emergency, the governor and lawmakers found time for a performative special legislative session about so-called oil industry price gouging. Again, it's about priorities. Water policy is a tangential issue related to wildfires, but California has built little new water infrastructure since the 70s, when the population was roughly half what it is today. The state passed a major water bond a decade ago, but we've seen little progress on building traditional infrastructure projects. The California Coastal Commission in 2022 even rejected a privately funded desalination plan in Huntington Beach over concerns about plankton. More water would not have stopped the wildfires, but additional water resources would bolster firefighting efforts and mitigate some of the effects of drought seasons. Instead of building the basic water infrastructure prioritized under the Pat Brown administration, recent administrations have focused almost solely on conservation and rationing. Yet approximately 50% of California's water flows to the Pacific, 40% is used for agriculture, and 10% is for urban uses. Limiting swimming pools and car washing is no solution. We've seen criticisms about an inadequate number of firefighters. Thanks to union power, we see abundance of LA firefighters earning total compensation packages above $500,000 a year, with one captain earning more than $900,000 a year. If pay reflected market rates, California state government and municipalities could afford to hire more of them. Finally, I want to touch on California's cumbersome building regulations, which are a notable hurdle in the rebuilding process. Thankfully, the governor issued an executive order suspending CEQA and the Coastal Act, but why has it taken disaster? State officials have relaxed some rules for arenas and high-density housing, but not in a far-reaching matter. Little by little, California has built up a massive administrative state. I'm hoping the heartbreaking nature of the wildfires will finally cause state officials to rethink this failed approach. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Greenhut, let me ask you, many states require that state insurance commissioner has to approve a rate increase before it takes effect. The fast rate approvals are a crucial component of healthy state insurance markets. Many of us that served in state legislature worked in that area. So is there something that you're seeing that stands out when it comes to California that's lacking in this area, or some of the moves or changes that have been made as a result of trying to better position themselves and unfortunately failing when it comes to insurance rates?
There are about 12 states with prior approval systems, and California's is the strictest. You pointed out in your opening that, well, for one thing, it made the insurance commissioner an elected position. There aren't a lot of insurance commissioners, often are looking to higher office, who want to be the person who approved a major rate hike. And the problem is, this has been going on for years. We're not able to just adjust the rates and their process. There are things that could be done within the Prop 103 process. We could speed up the rate approval process, and California is notoriously slow for that. And it's supposed to, by the initiative, these rate reviews are supposed to take place within 60 to 180 days, and the average is somewhere like 293 days. And then, there's one example. We have these interveners who are consumer attorneys, and one of their consumer watchdog is one of them, and their predecessor group wrote the initiative, and they earn substantial fees, essentially opposing any sort of rate increase, and that just drags it out. There's one quick example.
I think that implementing prescribed burns has become more difficult due to the regulations in California. And Mr. Greenhut, are there significant barriers that exist in California to exercising these prescribed burns? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, the California Environmental Quality Act, which continues to come up, CEQA, it just imposes enormous hurdles and delays to doing any sort of project. So when we had these horrific wildfires up in Paradise in Butte County, after the fires, it took 2 years before the county was even able to let out contracts for brush clearance. There was a previous fire where it took 18 months, I believe, to get a CEQA approval to do some brush clearance, and the community was destroyed shortly thereafter. So CEQA is a huge hurdle for everything. And one of the points about CEQA, we hear a lot that, we need these regulations to protect the environment. But the CEQA delays and lawsuit process doesn't help the environment. I was just looking up, 49% of lawsuits, CEQA lawsuits, are public projects, and many of them are environmental projects, including parks, university housing, renewable energy. 80% of them are infill projects, which are, a lot of people in California say we need more of those to deal with climate change, and yet the lawsuits target those projects. And 64% of the lawsuits are from associations such as unions which don't have a history of environmental activism. So in other words, they use them to secure wage concessions. So is this helping the environment? And if we're slowing prescribed burns and brush clearance, and we've done very little. We're supposed to do about, according to CAL FIRE, about 1 million acres of clearance a year. on federal and state land, and have been doing around 125,000 acres a year. And the governor said we need to do more of it. It's just we haven't seen more of it. And so yes.
Well, and that was going to be a follow-up question. I understand that Governor Newsom publicly committed to step up the rate of mechanical thinning and prescribed burns in order to clean up the excessive fuel in the forest. And again, I'll just ask you, has Governor Newsom followed through on that commitment at this point?
Well, I agree with what he's saying needs to be done. What I'm looking at is that we have all these bureaucratic hurdles. So I think even if a governor issues an executive order, everything still gets just gummed up in the works. And that's kind of what I want to address, is some of these long-term regulatory issues, not, the short-term partisan issues. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, and I want you to use the balance of the time. If you were in charge of setting policy related to forest management and prescribed burns, what changes would you make?
Well, I think the focus, since I'm not an expert in forest clearance, is dealing with CEQA. I mean, that is an impediment to everything. And our state, whenever there's a project our state needs to, some lawmaker wants to get through, such as the Kings Arena in Sacramento, what's the first thing they do? A CEQA exemption. State has offered CEQA exemptions on different high-density housing projects. I agree with that. It's just that we need to do it in a far-reaching manner so that all sorts of projects are spared the delays, the added costs, and often developers and public agencies don't even propose projects because they know it's going to lead to lawsuits and years of litigation and higher costs.
Well,
Gentleman yields his time.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. First, I want to assure Mr. Liu that Messrs. Hilton and Ring and Greenhut are three of the most insightful experts on California public policy that I've had the honor to work with during my 45 years of public service, and I can't imagine a more distinguished panel than we have before us right now. Mr. Liu might also be surprised to learn that before the modern era, California lost 4.5 million acres a year on average to catastrophic fire. Then in the 20th century, we established land management agencies to do a little of the gardening ourselves instead of leaving it to nature. We auctioned off excess timber to logging companies that paid us to remove the excess. We leased public lands to cattle and sheep ranchers to suppress brush growth through grazing. We did controlled burns to remove undergrowth. We cut fire breaks to contain fires. We used herbicides to keep brush from residential areas. We put out fires before they could explode out of control. And our fire losses declined from 4.5 million acres a year on average to just 250,000 acres a year throughout the 20th century. But we don't do those practices anymore. Our fire losses are now back up to an average of 1.5 million acres in 2020, 4.5 million acres. Mr. Greenhut, what happened?
Thanks, Congressman. It just seems like an ideological shift. We've moved towards land preservation at all costs. And I was just looking through, thinking of
but it doesn't preserve the land, does it? It's caused the incineration of the land.
Exactly. I mean, the idea was to preserve species. I mean, we pointed out before that we. And some of it's growth control, too. Pointed out that a project was stopped for hardening the telephone poles over concerns about an endangered weed. It's this, yeah.
Mr. Ring, is this a policy?
You, Mr. Ring, do you agree that FEMA should be eliminated?
Reform, not eliminate. No.
And what about you, Mr. Greenhut?
I don't have any opinion on FEMA. That's not why I'm here.
Okay. And, I understand why you wouldn't want to opine on it either. You're probably afraid also.
I'm not afraid. I just don't like to take opinions on things that I haven't
studied. You're not afraid of crossing Donald Trump?
I'm not here on a partisan basis.
I know that you
I'm not even a Republican.
Well,
I want to ask Mr. Greenhut, California's home insurance market is being held hostage by insurance commissioners and a judicial system that punishes insurers for attempting to price insurance based on risk. For example, in 2014, State Farm requested a rate increase of 6.9%, which was opposed by the insurance commissioner and an advocacy group. Initially, State Farm was told that instead of a rate increase, they were to retrospectively reduce rates by 7% and rebate their customers $100 million in excess premiums. After years of litigation, the courts ruled that State Farm didn't have to pay back the excessive premiums, but they were ordered to pay $2.2 million to the consumer group for their legal fees. And my understanding is this is allowing outside interveners, as it were, to challenge proposed insurance rate increases and being paid expenses for doing so. Is it reasonable to expect insurance companies to operate in an environment that required them to pay off their challengers even when they win in court?
Well, imagine this started in 2016 and it was resolved, a year or two ago. And so the whole system, and it was designed by the consumer organization, and they get paid, intervener fees for supposedly standing up for consumers. So that whole process took several years, and they imagine going, if you have a business and you propose a rate increase, and then the government says, no, you have to decrease rates by X amount, and then you get launched into this long court battle. And even after you win the court battle, which State Farm did, and it was a pretty strong verdict in their favor, they still had to pay these interveners around a couple $1 million. And now, under Prop 103, there are things that the state could do without going back to the initiative process to look more closely at how these interveners are paid and make sure that they contribute substantially to the process. A lot of this is languages in Prop 103. We need to enforce that language as it exists. So there are things that could be done about that intervener process without going back to the ballot.
And in fact, wasn't there a study showing, and Mr. Greenhut, I think you can speak to this, that in the 2020 fires, the emissions that were let out there was twice as much as any savings California had for, what was it, the previous
16 years. So we're undermining any gains we're making in every wildfire.
That's right. I'll just...